All right, we're finally done. We're freed. I want to show her Konosuba next because it's like 2 seasons, 10 episodes each, and it goes by pretty quickly, and it's funny, and I think she'll like it anyway. I haven't watched it since like I was in high school. I mean, I liked it in high school. I thought it was great. I'm kind of curious how well it'll hold up. I actually think it'll probably hold up pretty well. Yeah, that will not be the podcast next week because next week is the Scott Pilgrim anime. You know what we found out? Apparently Lisa is not going to be in the show, which I find really interesting. I think there was a statement from Brian Lee O'Malley where he said that he kind of likes the idea that every single version of Scott Pilgrim is a different thing, and I'm kind of okay with it. I'm a little okay with it. I think, well, it depends on what they do. It depends on what they kind of replace that with. If anything at all, because the Lisa shit is so fucking important in the comic. I think it would be kind of interesting to be like, yeah, to end up in a situation where the comic, the book is not a replacement for, the movie is not a replacement for the book. The show is not a replacement for the book. The game is definitely not a replacement for the book. The book is also not a replacement for the movie or the show or the game. And none of them are vice versa. And Scott Pilgrim is this weird multimedia parallel dimension, like series of parallel dimension stories with the same, broadly the same characters, but alternate takes on the same themes, where they split off into these weird directions. I think that shit's pretty interesting. Did I ever talk about... Okay, there's a really interesting video that I got linked about the Scott Pilgrim... it's called like the best worst comic book movie or something like that. And it's basically analyzing how weird it is as an adaptation. And it goes far beyond the fact that it's like, oh, yeah, well, they had to cut stuff. Because my reading of it was always, they had to cut stuff because it didn't work with the runtime constraints of a movie. And that was true. That is true. The film is constrained around that. And it's kind of built around the fact that it has a movie's runtime. But it goes way further than that. And it's actually kind of interesting. Essentially, the movie started production after the second volume of the comic came out. 2 of 6, right? And there was about 1 volume released every year. So Edgar Wright really wanted to make this movie, and he was like, but there wasn't enough out. So they agreed, and I guess he got in contact with O'Malley, and they were all down for it, and the rights were signed off, but it was like, well, the story's not complete enough to adapt. So he made Hot Fuzz in between as a stopgap. Isn't that so fun? Hot Fuzz was Edgar Wright's stalling tactic to wait out the Scott Pilgrim comic being done. Isn't that so funny? What a guy. So, the comic, the final volume of the comic came out 2 weeks before the movie. You're like, what the fuck? Apparently Wright and some members of, the production team, the people who, certain members of the production team worked very closely with O'Malley throughout the process, because O'Malley, when he started writing the series, wasn't sure how it was going to go in a lot of different ways, which you can kind of feel. I think it all works out in the end, because it kind of turned, I think O'Malley ended up executing it so well that that kind of aimless, sort of almost listless feeling really enhances what the book is going for, and by the end the payoff is really incredible. But there's a bunch of things in the movie that aren't in the book, but were in like notes or concepts that O'Malley was tossing around that he just didn't use or decided to go with something different. Here's another funny thing, like I think a great anecdote for this. The climax in the movie, right? Like the whole climactic scene in Gideon's nightclub with the big black pyramid and all that, that really cool set piece location. That happens in the comic, right? That is the same like location of the climb. The context for that, if you haven't read it, is completely different. The context is like totally different things are happening, but it's the same location. It was made for the movie first. Like O'Malley kind of had the idea of like, okay, he's gonna fight Gideon at the end, and he kind of had that in his head, and he knew that was probably locked in. But like Edgar Wright and his set designer designed that set first, and O'Malley was like, that shit looks awesome. I'm gonna write that into my comic. It's almost not even fair to call the movie an adaptation of the comic. It's almost like a parallel universe of the comic. And I think actually makes me appreciate it more. And I think it's actually a really unique thing about that movie, and it makes me really curious about the new anime, because it's like, okay, how do you, I don't know, it's a really interesting situation. I would totally recommend it, that video. It's really like the whole breakdown of the timeline of where the movie was in production versus where the book was and how they lined up was really throwing me for a loop. I've never seen anything that was handled in that way. And it kind of makes me appreciate both more. I would totally recommend it. It was called like Scott Pilgrim, the best, like the best worst adaptation or something, comic movie, something along those lines. It's like a 45-minute video. Let's see.